still kept dreaming. And some of them were precognitive. I lived in a rural area. We didn't get too many visitors there. And sometimes a dream that I would have had information about an approaching visitor that I couldn't have anticipated. So that gave me an idea that dreams could provide information.
Well, welcome to the Dream World podcast. Dale, welcome back. Today I'm honored to be joined by Dale Graff, author, physicist, former director of Project Stargate, which was the US government's program investigating remote viewing phenomena and other interesting phenomena. So Dale has spent decades at the frontier of consciousness research, exploring these mysteries of perception, intuition, non-local mind. So thank you so much for being here and taking the time to chat with me. I'm excited to revisit some of these topics. You mentioned to me before that dreams have guided your path. And can you tell me about your journey into this field? How did it begin and how did you end up, with doing government funded research on consciousness?
Yeah, well, okay. Thank you. Thank you for having me on board here. It's a topic I, of course, enjoy talking about. And probably every time I talk about it, I have a different twist to it. So if it doesn't sound like what you heard before, don't be too concerned about it. But it's a broad area. And your basic question is, how did I get into dreams? And then how did I get into the work that I eventually became involved in with the government? Yeah, it's a long story, actually. And I won't dwell on all the details, but I guess I have to go back to the beginning when I was a kid. How far back can you go? And and maybe even a little further. But dreams and unusual perceptions were part of my childhood experience. I didn't think of them as too unusual at the time. In fact, I was quite. I had a lot of dreams. I should say I had frequent dreams. And when I tried to talk to them as a child, I'm talking about early, like 4, 5, 6 years old. They weren't really one that were talked about, so I just ignored them. I ignored talking about them, but I still kept dreaming. And some of them were precognitive. I lived in a rural area. We didn't get too many visitors there. And sometimes a dream that I would have had information about an approaching visitor that I couldn't have anticipated. So that gave me an idea that dreams could provide information. And nobody was around then to say no, they couldn't. So I went ahead and assumed that that's part of what I could do. And then I got away from that, schooling and high school and college, and I didn't really pay a lot of attention to dreams. But one time, I think I was finishing my master's degree in physics, and I just finished it, and I felt that I needed to do something a little different, get away from all this technology stuff. So I went to the library, and I was living in Baltimore at the time, Baltimore, Maryland, and beautiful library. And I thought I'd go in there and just read something other than technical. So I walk around and I kind of walk to the desk, and there's a book laying there. I just grabbed it. I wanted to find a novel, and this looked like a novel. And the book was on a couple that had shared mutual dreams. And I thought that was really unusual. It's first of all dreams, and now they're talking about mutual dreaming. It was a novel, and I checked it out and read it. I was totally fascinated with this. I said, "Well, this is something I think I'm going to look into sometime in the next few years." So, and I put it aside, but it really jarred me. Here's this book. I walk right up to it as if I'm looking for something to shift my attention from technology or total physics over into something more directly experiential, and there was. Okay, so that kept me going on that and interested in dreams. And then, of course, along the way, I had, intuitions and synchronicities. That's kind of a link to precognitive dreaming. And ultimately, I became more deeply interested in, uh, altered perceptions and or abilities, particularly along the intuition line, uh, at one time, and this is during the Vietnam era, and I, I was I had worked about 10 years in the aerospace industries in the Gemini program. And then I transferred to government and I took up a position as an analyst with a place called the Foreign Technology Division in Dayton, Ohio. We were analysts trying to determine what the Soviets might be doing in the next 5 to 10 years. And my job was involved in forecasting future systems. So I had the idea of always thinking about the future, and it fit my interest and I guess my basic nature at the time. So that was there in my background and foreground as well. But when I had the temporary assignment while I was at FTD, even though I was now moved to Hawaii for a couple of years for part of the to do aircraft analysis and aircraft tactics evaluations during Southeast Asia conflicts. And it was there I learned stories how soldiers and pilots, sometimes they would chat at the club in the evenings about these strange things that would happen, and they knew when to run away, when to turn and maneuver. And I said, there's something here more intuitive. I couldn't have known that, but I moved in the right position. I thought it was kind of interesting. And then I had my own involvement with struggling in the surf to try. Then, and I found somebody I shouldn't have known about and was able to bring her back and safely. And that was an intuitive process. I had, how did I do that? So I came back from that really motivated to look into this whole field of ESP or intuition, and of course dreams. Now my dream life picked up too. Um, so I wrote I got into looking into the Soviet literature more, uh, and more beyond what my job description called for. I was looking into the psychological stuff, and I found papers on ESP research in the Soviet Union, and I thought that was interesting, and I summarized that and put it in a short paper and sent it forward, and the commander liked it and told me to keep following this topic in the Soviet, see what's going on there. And then shortly thereafter, I was visited, our organization was visited by Tara Putoff and Russell Targ, and they were doing what was called remote viewing research at the Stanford Research Institute. And I really hadn't heard a lot about that because my focus was on the foreign stuff. So, but here they are now in our organization, and they're looking for funding to continue the work that had initially been started by the CIA, but then dropped for political reasons. So I was brought into the meeting, and since I guess I was the only expert on ESP, asked for my opinion. It seemed kind of interesting, and it's certainly down the line of interest I was developing, even though it was conscious state stuff and not only dreams. So that I was appointed as a contract manager and became involved with directly with remote viewing research that was going on at Stanford with Harold Russ, Harold Putoff and Russell Targ, and eventually Ed May came on board. So that got me into the field, and then in time I transferred down to the Defense Intelligence Agency in Washington, D.C., where I continued this work and eventually became the director of the Army unit that had been set up to do remote viewing operational work. And was transferred to the Defense Intelligence Agency. Yeah, and then I was moved up there to become the chief and of the unit toward its latter years. And since it was a special access program, we had to change code words, which is typical of security programs to keep track of who's knows what, where, and when. And I chose the name Stargate because I liked the sound of it, and it was not in the book that we were supposed to select from. So I had to write a memo to the secretary, undersecretary of defense, and to get approval for this unusual and actually good sounding word compared to the ones that were in there. And it was approved, and that's how the term Stargate came into being, even though there were other code words for the program. And you probably heard about Sunstreak and Gruel Flame and Sunlight. But this is sort of the last one. And the one that seems to be linked now with more often with the remote viewing activity there. But that was done at Fort Meade. And then, of course, the program closed in 1995. Then I was able to go back to my dream world more dramatically and continue on from there doing work with dreams, precognitive dreams, and my independent research. So that's a long, maybe a short version of what I could normally tell you. So I'm sure you have bits and pieces you want to dive in on, and I'm here to try to pick them up and go from there.
Thanks. Yeah, that's really, really interesting. I mean, I love how, you've always been a vivid dreamer, and it seems like there was a wide range of experiments being done, while you were working in this industry. And I know you're still, doing a lot of things on your own as well. What are some of the most compelling, interesting stories about remote viewing or psi phenomenon that you've witnessed during this time?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of really interesting experiences, both from my personal stuff that occurred before and after my involvement with the government and the remote viewing work, um, and even during that time frame, because I didn't abandon dream work. I just added it to whatever else I was doing, and of course afterwards. But I would say uh, I started doing a focus on precognitive dreaming. I had enough hints of them all along, but after I retired, I decided to really focus on them. And I discovered that I could actually have dreams about future incidents that would be in the paper, and they were very accurate. And I followed this track of investigation, this independent investigation, for about a year and a half. Then I decided to really make it more formal and set up an experiment with a colleague of mine from Florida. We did a controlled experiment with dreaming about a picture that would be on a certain page in a certain newspaper 3 days ahead of time, and then 7 days ahead. And we were successful with that. And this eventually became published in American Institute of Physics conference proceedings, because I presented on this at the quantum retrocausation conference that was part of the American Association for the American Association of the Advancement of Sciences, AAAS, that met in San Diego, and in 2017, I think it was. So that got published in a physics publication, and it that work is really made me think about the future. How can we do this? How can anybody do this? It was just me and my colleague, but you look around and you see it's all over the place when you really start talking to people. Well, just think about the IASD dream contest and the precognitive the material there that comes out. So, that is a very vivid illustration to the IASD members about this ability of dreaming an unknown picture. It might be in a sealed envelope, or it might be in the future, selected later. So yeah, so those were startling things for me to see, and then when I did this more independently, yeah, I found out some of the more spectacular dreams, and I really wasn't seeking them, other than a desire to have a dream about an interesting event that will occur in the next week. But you have to be really tight about the parameters, because you could dream about a lot of things, and you look around, you find matches. But I wanted to be really specific, and some of these were. An example was the Columbia explosion. The reentry problem with that burned up during reentry, I think it was 2002. So that dream was really quite vivid, and that was 5 days ahead of time of when that tragedy actually occurred. So that was one really startling example. There were others like that. Again, that came from into the future, where I would get some indication of validation from the newspaper or the media. So that, and one that had to do with the almost nuclear meltdown in Japan, that also came in a very vivid dream. And the interesting thing about that one, it was presented as a TV program in a dream. So here I'm dreaming, and I'm not quite lucid, although I think Ed Kellogg would call it semi-lucid. So I'm there in this dream, and all of a sudden, this really large screen TV comes on in the dream. I don't have a large screen TV. So in this large screen TV is a commentator and is showing a map of radiation profiles that will be drifting toward the U.S. And he went on to have words like saying "alert, alert," and the typical thing you would find on like the Weather Channel, people saying "be on the alert for the tornado" or something. So it was a very dramatic and in a way somewhat threatening thing. It was not a comfortable dream to have about nuclear radiation coming into the country. Um, it didn't show exactly what the cause was. It just showed it came from the Far East somewhere, this radiation belt. So all I could do was record it. And I have a friend who works in weather, who is a retired officer that was in the weather groups in the Air Force. And she had contacted me around the same time and said that, and we exchanged dreams from time to time. And she explained that she had an odd dream too, only it had to do with huge waves and some kind of tsunami. And she thought it would be in the area of Japan. So that was the two inputs, mine and hers. And then actually a month later, that event happened in Japan. She had the more specific, and I had the radiation aspect. And that map, which I saw in a dream, was almost an exact replica of one that appeared in the USA Today, when it was evident that there were measurable radiation fallouts from that disaster that's drifting across the U.S. So that was a very, very dramatic situation. Um, so, there's a lot of dreams that maybe not that dramatic, but that allowed me to see that our dreaming minds can really, really pick up future situations like this. Not just nationally critical things like that, but even at a personal level. And as we all know, being ASD members, that's really, really pretty much what our experiences are with precognitive dreams. So, but at a professional level, they help me actually avoid difficulties. so, so that was a good thing to have in your hip pocket. You have a dream about doing this or not doing that, and it turns out to be the best thing that could have you could have done or not done for that day. Um, one example was when I became involved with as a director of the remote viewing unit at Fort Meade. I wasn't an active remote viewer. I'm not saying I even could have been, but I was there as a chief, and but I was concerned about all the people. So I had a very strong feeling about the people there. That they were okay, and there wouldn't be any issue in their life that might affect what we were doing or whatever. But one night, I have this dream, and I'm not intending to have a pre-count or any kind of psychic dream, where one of the individuals in the unit is represented as a dream figure, and it's an office setting, so it's in the morning in the dream. Come to the office and go to my desk, and shortly thereafter, this individual comes in, and suddenly he falls on the floor at the coffee pot and just kind of rolls over, screaming in agony, holding his gut area. So, wow, what kind of dream is this? So I go to the office the next day. I look around. I'm early. I wanted to get there early that day. And of course, he's not there yet. And I said, well, I'm going to really look foolish if I say anything about this. But I did ask one of the administrators to give me a list of telephone numbers of the emergency groups around here. And fortunately, we live not we were based not far away from the base hospital, so I got that number. And so I'm ready to go. And she asked me, why do you want this? Why do I want these numbers? I said, well, this is the time every year when we update our files on emergency numbers. Did you forget that? So I didn't really tell her why I wanted them. So anyway, so I'm there, and in comes this work colleague, and I'm stuck in a dream. There he is at the coffee pot and plops over on the floor and starts rolling around, holding his gut, screaming in agony. But I'm calm. I have the phone number. I call the closest emergency number, and they're there in moments. And the medics that come in say, well, it looks like your buddy is having a kidney stone problem. So that's what it was. It wasn't serious, but it sure looked serious. It was certainly not comfortable for him. But it illustrates clearly here is a situation I have no way of knowing about, and he probably doesn't either. He probably didn't have any symptoms until that one blocked stone hit him. And this is about 6 or 7 hours ahead of time when the dream occurred. So that's the kind of thing that happens, and I've had others like that too. But that was the most credible because I actually had somebody get a telephone number, and even though I didn't tell them why. They knew it was kind of odd for anybody to do it, but I found an excuse why I needed to have that telephone number.
That's funny. That's so incredible. I mean, it's insane and interesting how, dreams are just this powerful tool that we have. And I definitely want to get into, how we can all strengthen these abilities and work on our PSI abilities. So we will talk about that. But first, I wanted to ask you one thing just about terminology, because I know there's a lot of confusion on it. Can you help me differentiate between the Project Stargate and the Gateway process?
Stargate is totally different. That's the government name, the name that I coined toward the latter part of the remote viewing activity at Fort Meade. Has nothing to do with the Monroe Institute. Now, early on in the program, there were individuals that were members of the Fort Meade unit. They had a different code word at the time, not certainly not Stargate, but there were some early members of the group when it first began around 1979, 1980 that did attend a the programs at Monroe, mainly to understand getting into a relaxed state, that kind of thing, which had nothing to do with developing a remote viewing ability. In fact, Monroe didn't do that at all. He was strictly into his procedure and having anybody come in there that achieves this level of I've forgotten the gateway terms. I think they go all the way up to number 20, 21, or whatever. How to achieve those levels of perception, altered state, but it's not a part of the program. Um, the remote viewers, the people at Fort Meade, some of them went there on their own nickel, so there's no connection at all. There may have been early on some higher level interest for commanders, but we did not really develop a link with them after that. Now, in many later years, in fact, 2 years ago, the International Remote Viewing Association had a combined conference with the Monroe group at Charlottesville, Virginia. So this is probably the first time we really got together and had a chance to discuss some of the things that may have happened in the early years. But no, it's they were totally different. And Gateway is strictly the Monroe, and Stargate was only the remote viewing unit that Ford meets with the latter years.
Gotcha. I appreciate that clarification because I know I get that question a lot. So, I know that this consciousness research is regaining popularity in the last 10 years, and I know it's just the beginning of what we're capable of discovering. But, people are starting to research it again. And even after Stargate was declassified, do you think that world governments in general are still studying these kinds of things? Is there funding for it?
I think after the program was closed, there was so much publicity, and not all very good either. The rationale for closing it was based on a review of a selected scientific panel, and it was known that some of them had a connection with a known critics organization. So it was sort of biased from the very beginning, and they didn't even look at the really good material that occurred early in the program. Um, so there were issues in selectivity, and then, of course, press came out from that report. It's closed because, according to them, the program yielded no useful data. There was nothing that was any good, which is totally not true. I'll even talk about some of those examples. But so that was a bad thing, and it sort of scared people away that might have been interested in continuing it somewhere. But there was also other practical issues involved. um, where would you actually house such a program? And we were lucky. We had a good umbrella with the intelligence organization that we had. But the projects we got into were pretty widespread. We were going into Homeland Security issues. We were doing FBI, well, not FBI, but Secret Service, other kinds of links when it related to somebody like an international fugitive, certainly not a U.S. Individual. Um, so we got into those things, and that didn't really fall under the charter of the Defense Intelligence Agency. So these problems, where would you put this kind of activity? So I don't think now today that those problems have gone away. In fact, they're probably going to be a lot worse now. But with really tighter views and what the government does. So I think I think the interest is there. I think there's enough publicity, and the internet has really been a tremendous boost for all this, obviously. And people are becoming more open. There are more conferences. There's more information that shows the good points, the ones that really projects that really did yield significant data are getting out into the open. And I think that is going to attract people to pay more attention. And I think individuals in different organizations might even be attending development courses, whether they be on the dream side or the remote viewing side. And there are a number of programs available to do that. That's happening at an individual level. And I think those individuals will probably end up in their organization contributing in some way using these talents. Uh, it may be really limited in use or visibility. Um, One of the lessons we learned was just you can't be too visible on this because the press will just do all kinds of crazy things. Some of it is good, and some of it is not good, and managers don't like this kind of publicity. And government people that provide funding don't like it either because there's always that block or that element of individuals that would really object to this if they knew it was going on anywhere. And we had to dodge a lot of issues like that, where individuals that have a really strong negative opinions began to interfere with our chain of command and our finance chain. We really had a difficulty in some cases mitigating those negative inputs, but we were able to do it, and we survived just 20 or so years. So.
Yeah. Wow, yeah, there's still so much stigma and skepticism around psi phenomena in general and parapsychology and, lucid dreaming not so much anymore because, we have obvious electrophysiological markers for lucid dreaming and it's more accepted by the scientific community, but there's still reputable journals that are hesitant to publish certain things if it veers, too much towards skepticism. So do you think that remote viewing is more difficult for the average person to learn and practice? And how does that differ from being able to research it as opposed to, lucid dreaming research?
I think just a minute, something came on here. I'm going to get rid of this. Oh, okay, there's some ad that she post. Um, no, I think the the way the way remote viewing began at Stanford Research Institute in 1972, 73, 74, we really didn't have a very extensive protocol. It was a very natural kind of approach. You just sit down, relax, set the objective, and go from there, and allow your subconscious mind to perceive the desired information. The key was to get your conscious thoughts out of the way. And, it's tough to do, but maybe that's where the Monroe practices came in handy. So that aspect of remote viewing, if you stay with that definition and that perspective, it's not that difficult to do. And now later on, when a protocol was developed, it looked like it would be more extensive and more difficult and longer to do, and it probably is. But you still end up ultimately achieving reliable remote viewing results in the experimental setups. So I guess what I'm saying is it's not all that difficult. It depends on how you conceive of it, what method you want to take, and really how much effort you want to put into it, whether it be practice sessions or working with groups and going over and over, and you really understanding the process and how your perceptions correlate with ground truth. So, or the objective. It's a lot of work, but so is everything else. And now in dream work, yeah, maybe I'm biased here, but I really do think it's easier. I really do think dream work is easier, yeah, because there it's a matter of the objective. You set the objective, and I don't want to remember a dream. Most of the time, the people are not familiar with this will. If not, it's a second night, and then you go to the next step. Now tonight, I want to remember a dream about a picture that's in a sealed envelope, or the area where my colleague is visiting at this moment, and at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Well, you do that enough times, and you find it's not that difficult either. And of course, the step into lucid dreaming, we know all about the work of Bob Wagner and Ed Kellogg here, and those that preceded them. These are basic steps. So I'm saying it's not that difficult to move into dreams, lucid dreaming. And then I tag on the precognitive dreaming. And when I don't do workshops anymore, I have other activities going on, take my time. But years ago, I did workshops where I blended both the dream side and I called it the night side of psi, and the remote viewing or conscious state side. And I found that most of the people actually preferred initially coming in contact with the psi through the dream side. They just felt more comfortable. I think partly because they could do it at home in their own pace. So that might have been a factor here. They didn't have to sit in front of somebody or have some instructor evaluate them later. They could do self-evaluations and self-learning. So that probably was probably why. But either way, I'm saying that it's not that difficult. It really isn't. The difficulty might be in just what is it you want to do with it, what degree of accuracy you want, what are your objectives. And the way I did my workshops was I kind of left it up to individuals where they want to go. But my objective was this is something that you can use in your own life. Period. That's it. You don't have to go beyond that. But you can if you want. If you have goals to work as a psychic detective, then move on to that. But I don't go there. That's somebody else can do that. Some of my colleagues work in that direction. So, but with the goal of what can you do in my own life and the life of my loved ones and people around me, I think it's going to be really easy to do and more easily understood and acceptable when we move in that direction. One of the things I made a case 4 years ago and still do, look at all these school shootings. Well, that maybe nationally wide, they're not a lot, but they're certainly a lot. Why wouldn't parents and children, a day or two before these tragic events, not have a warning, not have a precognitive dream about that? Certainly, they would. But and I'm sure they have happened, but they're not discussed. They're not reported. Nobody knows. So here you have a potential of how you can actually help out. How parents can help out, and children for their own safety by being open to dreams. And whenever one that comes up in their dream life that has that kind of foreboding, then there should be some caution taken. And I think if this is considered seriously over a period of time, this could be another alert system that we all can do, parents and children. It's like the Aberfan incident in Wales back in what's that, 50s or 60s, and then the flood of precognitive information that existed before that tragic event when that huge mountain of coal slag killed over 100, I think 120 children in that school. And the dreams that occurred that were actually recorded or told to others by the children that died, and also parents before, you know, they were real dreams. They existed and they were accurate. So, and then, and along that line, the terrorist attacks, wherever there's always that possibility. And still vividly remember that CNN program. It was a news program that interviewed one of that was the wife of one of the people that died in that Monroe building. I think it's pronounced in Oklahoma, uh, about 2 decades ago, the late 1998, I think. And the interview was really interesting. This was at a memorial, and maybe 6 months later after the tragedy, and her husband had perished in that. And then she's really mournful, of course. And then she goes on to tell the reporter that if she only had acted, because her husband had this dream about not going to the office that day because he saw it engulfed in flames and fire. And she said, "No, you're going to be late. You got to go." So that's just one story, and then there are those from 9/11, and I could go on that one too. But here you have this tremendous potential, and that housewife that had that dream was not a member of ASD. She didn't know anything about dreams. And this is probably before their organization was even established. But nevertheless, there they are, and people have them. And ASD can certainly, and it has been promoting this for decades now. And I'm a promoter for that part of dreaming that allows us to peek ahead in time and keep ourselves out of trouble.
Yeah, precognitive dreams are truly fascinating and it happens so often. I mean, it's really important, like you said, to normalize dream sharing so we can really, talk about this more, normalize telling people when we have certain dreams and we can use this data, in a more efficient way. I do think it's a heavy responsibility to, feel like it's something preventable if you had the dream. Maybe that's not necessarily the case, maybe it can help us be emotionally prepared or, maybe act a certain way that day, but I don't necessarily think that one person should feel like they have the responsibility to stop a natural disaster. So
That,
there's that as well.
that comes up a lot. Yeah, and
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. You're not going to stop the national disasters, but you can certainly begin keeping yourself and loved ones out of it. out of harm's way. And it may be in time that will change and that there will be a system developed, even in local networks, for example. I tried to set up something like that years ago, but it became too time consuming to really carry forward with. But I think it's potential, and I think with the internet, because I started my idea before the really big surge of the internet. So now it's so different in terms of how we can coordinate and collect data and analyze it. And we're in a much better position to do this kind of thing. So maybe another time to take another look at this. Groups
Yeah.
in cities that do this and for that area. And my basic idea at the time was certain metropolitan areas or any area, you have a group of dreamers get together. And the objective is within the next week or two, is there anything that this community needs to know about that would be potentially dangerous and potentially preventable. And that would be the key here, potentially preventable, because then that might filter out the ones that you actually can do nothing about.
True. Yeah, and it can even help with the emotional impact, and I think you're right, that's great, and if people in positions of power start to take dreams more seriously, then, more can be done and less weight is on the individual, I think. And even with, remote viewing research and things like that, what kind of ethical considerations are there, especially when researching dreams as well? Any privacy concern or potential things to look out for that we need to keep in mind as we explore these other dimensions?
Oh, certainly, and yeah, I think it's a big thing. And in a remote viewing community, and with the International Remote Viewing Association, we established a long time ago a strict code of ethics. In fact, I hate to admit it, I borrowed that from the ASD files and just simply expanded them for the remote viewing community. So yeah, we certainly have that on the books as far as an organization is concerned. Now, individually, we have no control over the individuals, but it should be part of all the training that goes on. Be alert to ethics, and it's not just how you treat the data. It's or others. It's how you interpret it too, because you're not always going to have clear interpretations. So the ethics part is be cautious and just don't jump to the gun, so to speak, with a particular interpretation of which you suspect is a precognitive dream. As you know, in dream work, it could be symbolic, it could be something else. And in remote viewing, it tends not to be that symbolic because we strive for the more literally accurate part of perceptions. But there's still elements of interpretation that come in. Another big one is timing. Okay, if a remote viewer perceives some incident, let's call it a terrorist attack in Boston. I just grabbed one out of the air here. So the question is, okay, that's what your imagery or your perception seem to suggest, but now where and when, can you narrow it down? So this is the challenge. How do you go from a generic concept or a perception of threat to making it actually useful and actionable, or at least to the point where you can be cautious about it and be more alert. So that's a real challenge here, and we're still wrestling with that in the remote viewing community, definitely. Um, so, and I think in the future that even certainly if you seek to apply it more directly, uh, that and the ethics that goes with it. What do you tell people, and how do you tell them? And like in dream work, sometimes the perception is there that if say you're doing a therapeutic session, and you get a perception in a dream, you may or may not want to directly relate it to the person you're working with. It may be too much to bear at the time. It might be another way to deal with it. So, or disguise the impact somehow, but just to get the idea across. So, no, there's a lot of issues here on strategies and ethics and behavior. So some people, I think some people can use a little bit of ego control. My personal feeling on this, but that's another matter. But that happens in anything that you develop an ability in. Um, Sometimes you go overboard a little bit, and the key word is balance. And I think with a good grounding or a good solid basis in reality, you can always have to come back to that. And for grounding, or I think that's a new age word, but I like it. And just being in nature and relaxing in nature and working around it is a great way to calm down and get back to this reality. So, so they can make better judgments of what came out of the alternate spaces you were in.
Yes, true. That's great advice, and I wanted to ask you, as a lucid dreaming coach, I love asking people about their lucid dreams, so I have to put that in there. What's your lucid dreaming frequency like these days? And maybe if you feel called to share one of your favorite, most memorable lucid dreams?
Well, right now I'm still caught up in project work. Really, don't really my dream world is a little low right now. So, but prior to the projects I've been caught up in right now, um, yeah, I sure did have lucid dreams, and some of them, are kind of in the middle or between lucidity and semi-lucidity. Um, I'm trying to think of the best ones um, that I might have had recently. Oh God, what were they? I haven't thought about this for a while, but I think yeah. Well, I'm going to have to go back to the project work. When I was caught up in a search project while I was with Stargate, or actually a little before I was transferred there. Um, I was assigned to a search team that went to Italy to look for a U.S. general that was abducted by a terrorist group. And so I'm there with the search team to um, technically to coordinate all kinds of information, including remote viewing, although that wasn't made too explicit at the time. I was doing other things. But so I'm there um, looking at all the other data that we're getting, and then also coordinating remote viewing data that I was receiving from the Ford Meat unit. But during that time, the communication system locked up, and we couldn't get that data. So I'm kind of on my own. So I decided, well, I know I can lucid dream, I can dream, I can have precognitive dreams. I'm going to wonder if I can have a lucid dream about the terrorists. Where is the general located? And because that was a big issue, where can we find the general? And then lucid dreams began. That actually, it was so real. It's like I was walking around looking at the general in the place where he was held captive, and actually observing the captors, and very specific detail, including the fact that there were women there, maybe one or two, certainly one, and maybe two, and the search team had not even suspected there would be females involved in this abduction, which later on, as we learned, there were two women involved. And the vividness of that dream, it really represented what they looked like, and the strange situation that the general was in, which was inside a tent, inside an apartment building. What's the probability of having a lucid dream that has a tent inside an apartment building? So those were really stunning. And as I learned much later on, after the general was actually rescued, and I was able to talk with him. So that was a one that was really, really quite powerful for me. And then in later life, I often think about that incident. But I've had other lucid dreams that are really quite vivid too, where I think I'm really there on the scene. looking at this and doing that. Um, so that's just one issue, one example.
Yeah, that's incredible. So, I hear a lot of people talk about this a lot too. Do you think there's sometimes overlap between what's considered a lucid dream and what's considered, you know, out of body experience or astral projection? Because it seems like you could have maybe been both. You were seeing something and you were dreaming.
Yeah, well, that came up some years ago. That exact thing, and in fact, it had to do with something with ASD, um, and it, is that the one I want to tell? Yeah, uh, I've received. This is a day or two before I received an email announcing a conference, a deadline for papers. And so the dream that occurs, I had earlier set up a practice target, not necessarily for lucid, but just for anything. I always like to have this around. Sometimes I'll feel like, okay, tonight is the night. I'm going to see if I can dream about that picture that's in that envelope. Of course, I don't know what that picture is. It was randomly selected somehow. So right before this email comes in, which actually talked about lucid dreaming. So here's 2 days before I get the email, I have a lucid dream, and the sort of preambles the email. But in the lucid dream, I now am lucid, and this is is sort of a blackness, and then get through that, and then oh my goodness, I'm dreaming. What am I going to do? So I thought, well, I remembered the target picture somewhere. So I said, okay, while I'm here, I'm going to see if I can dream in this lucid dream about that picture. And then all of a sudden, there's a scene. Now, in retrospect, I couldn't tell if that was a lucid dream or an out-of-body experience because everything was so real and so vivid. But anyway, during the dream, I walk over to somebody that's lying on the ground and tap the individual to wake the individual up. And he just quivels a little. I can't move. I can't move it. Nothing moves. So this would make me think this is really not a lucid dream. I can't change anything. So then I shifted to something else, and I thought I'd take a look, see if I could find a friend of mine that lived in Africa. Then it was really incredible, vivid scene of this African setup and a couple of other places. So I came back, woke up eventually from that combination of lucidity and OBE type of perception. And later that day, I checked the target picture, and it really showed somebody lying on the ground with a kind of a stick, a rod. So that odd dream, that odd figure, was actually accurate. Uh, and the odd thing about the whole dream, I couldn't change the nature of that image in the dream. So it makes me wonder if that's a general perception that inside dreams, that the imagery is going to remain more fixed than it is in a typical lucid dream, or was it because it was an OBE type dream where the features, the landscape seems to be more fixed than it is in lucid dreams. So, sure, some arguments go as the other end of the lucid dreaming spectrum. Maybe that's true, but I tend to think it's something that's slightly different. There's something more firm about the environment and the experience for the OBE experience than it is for the typical lucid dream. So, it's sort of my viewpoint on that.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, there's so many nuances and consciousness experiences are such a spectrum. So, hopefully people don't let terminology hold them back, but it is cool to figure out what the differences are and compare experiences. Um, if people want to learn more about just experiments and the research out there, any good journals or organizations that you really recommend people diving deep into to learn more about this kind of stuff?
Well, of course, I'm a strong advocate of whatever IASD does. Here's a great organization. You really learn about dreams, that's for sure. And so that's my number one choice. Of course, the Remote Viewing Association, irva.org, is a great place, great place for learning about remote viewing. Then there are other organizations too. I mean, most of us, all of us know about IONS, the Institute of Noetic Science, another tremendous place. And the Society for Scientific Exploration, SSE, is excellent. There's an online conference coming up there as well. And the Parapsychology Association, well, in connection with the Ryan Research Institute uh, at Durham, North Carolina, the organization back in the 20s and 30s that was established or founded by J.B. Ryan and ESP World of Cars. Their hard approach to identifying ESP effects. So the Ryan Research Center, of course, is a great source. They have teaching programs. IRVA, the International Remote Viewing Association, has an IRVA Ed program that's available online. And I see IAMS constantly having programs slip through the internet here that I can see, and I'm sure ASD and the conferences there are abundant and available. So much, and I'm certain our local groups in your area as well. If you sort of search around in the internet, you probably run into them and join up with some of them. There are all the study groups around. Um, so, and I'm sure they focus on different aspects of the phenomenon. And some is be totally dream work, it may be totally related to personal things, or maybe not so much the sci part. And then, of course, there are remote viewing groups, self help groups, they're all kinds of groups like this around that are now available. Um, so you may just move around from one to the other to see what resonates with you.
Yes, true. There's so many communities out there and so much research out there, and what about your book and, the things you're working on? I know you're still very active with workshops and talks and things. So where can people find you if they want to, read about your stuff?
Yeah, well, I still have a website, and my email is martinviewer@dalegraff.com. I can be contacted there. So sure, I can answer questions frequently with people. Send an email, and I'm more than happy to do that. Yeah, so that's there, and I do give lectures, the presentations frequently. Um, and I'll be a speaker at the upcoming International Remote Viewing Association conference in Alamogordo, New Mexico, in October, and I'll also be a speaker at a kind of an interesting venue in Charlottesville, Virginia, in August. It's called Sci Games. Sci Games. And it's focused on more the fun aspect of the phenomenon. We don't want to forget that. You don't always be totally serious about this stuff. And you can have fun with it too, play games with it, and or have games and use that as a part of the experimental protocol, and then see how well you do compared to somebody else. It's sort of like what we do in ASD conferences when we have the dream telepathy or the precognitive dream contest during the conference, and then we get up and look at the results toward the end of the dream ball. This is always interesting things and fun to do. So yeah, so there are those things going on, and gosh, there's so much. And I would like to keep up with more of them, but I'm being flooded out right now with things to do and places to go. So, but it's all very good, and I think it's helping to open up the overall picture of not just one aspect of our nature, but of course, our dreaming mind. Dreaming mind is, to me, a huge area, but also the awake state, remote viewing state too. So bringing the two together would really, really advocate doing, and I have been doing that in my own life. So it's fun to go from night to day, like this, knowing that in either mode, you may have a perception that's quite relevant. And in a awake state, it may be a strong intuition, or my favorite term, synchronicity. And I think the whole field of precognition, the ability to perceive information in the future, is whether it be in a dream or in an awake intention through a remote viewing task or objective. Now, I think that is really an important aspect of developing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I really appreciate all the work you're doing and the foundation you've laid and all the research and just your passion for consciousness studies and dreams in general. It's much appreciated, and I know that the next few generations are gonna honor that work and continue the path. So thank you so much for chatting with me and allowing me to spread the message.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Glad to help out.